Kentaro Miura's Berserk is a landmark achievement in the manga industry. The story follows Guts as he walks the precarious line between life and death, between heaven and hell, between madness and sanity. In his travels, Miura incorporates ideas and themes from past historical figures, like the German mercenary Gotz von Berlichingen, past mythological stories like Daedalus and Icarus from Greek mythology, and even recent culture like Conan the Barbarian and Devilman Crybaby. But Miura's influences extend beyond characterization and thematic elements to the artwork itself. In fact, there are a handful of artists throughout history whom, if they didn't exist, it's hard to believe that Berserk would be what it is today. One man of note that I want to bring to your attention is French artist, illustrator, painter, sculptor, and even comic book artist, Gustave Dore. Dore achieved great success with his illustrations for the Bible, which is a series of 241 wood engravings that capture the essence of the famed biblical stories. Each engraving features intensely dramatic events that are often bone-chilling and ominous. Not only does Miura's artwork elicit similar feelings of despondence and fear, but there are specific images that Miura seems to have been directly inspired by to recreate at some level or another. Let's start with this wise man guided by the star image, which depicts Matthew chapter 2. Take note of the wise man on the camel. Daiba, the Kushan sorcerer, bears a distinct resemblance to this wise man. It's also important to mention that the wise men were also referred to as kings. And Daiba has stated in the manga that his overarching goal is to establish a magical kingdom or empire. The next photo we have is the Confusion of Tongues, which depicts the Tower of Babel. Now in Berserk, we have the Tower of Conviction, which emulates the Tower of Babel in size and magnitude. Now in the Tower of Babel, the inhabitants of Earth attempt to make a name for themselves by building the tower that reaches up to the heavens. Now God sees this and he's not too happy, so he decides to confuse the people's languages so they can't understand each other anymore. They thusly scatter across the earth, and the building of the city was henceforth stopped. When we examine this Berserk image that features Casca by the Tower of Conviction, we are reminded of the fact that she lost her ability to communicate with others due to her psychological trauma. In addition, the crumbling of the tower itself reminds us that man's vanity is truly a dangerous thing. Now this image reflects Jacob's dream, where he envisioned angels descending from heaven on a staircase. Now the Lord spoke to him and stated that he would be with him wherever he went. I believe Miura drew inspiration from this and implemented this in two different places in the manga. The first one was when Guts heard Griffith's dream, and he stares up at him at the top of the staircase as if he's a deity or something. This is particularly relevant because when Griffith fuses with the demon child, they transform into the Moonlight Boy. And the Moonlight Boy seems to be a representation for a godlike being, possibly even Christ. This leads me to the second situation, where Guts is saved by the marrow of the sea and God via the instructions of the Moonlight Boy. Again, Guts looks up at the Moonlight Boy like he's God, much like Jacob did in his dream. And in Jacob's dream, we even see the angelic beings descending downwards towards him, and the marrow who are saving Guts from the sea god almost look like angelic beings themselves. Now we'll get back to the biblical imagery in a bit, but Dore also reimagined the entirety of Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy, which is a seminal work that is considered by many the single greatest achievement of Western literature. The poem is divided into three parts, as he reimagines hell in the Inferno, purgatory in Purgatorio, and heaven in Paradiso. The work is so influential that Dante's Inferno is the most widely translated book after the Bible. And unsurprisingly, Dore's representations of said book have inspired artists like Kentaro Miura to capture the hideous nature of mankind. Now first up, we have an image of Dante and Virgil in the ninth circle of hell, a place housing people who are guilty of sins of betrayal. Now it's very interesting because Dante refers to this last circle of hell as the bottom of the universe. In it, they find a frozen lake where the sinners' bodies are trapped within the ice, with only their heads sticking out. Now in Berserk, we have an image of the red lake in the wake of the eclipse, and the eclipse can be likened to the worst parts of the astral realm, the bottom of the universe as it were. Much like Dore's image, we have bodies scattered everywhere in the lake, souls that are unfortunately past redemption. The next image showcases the second layer of hell, lust. In it, we see the lustful beings being tormented by a hellish hurricane that blows them every which way. For those unfamiliar with the Divine Comedy, Dantes Inferno utilizes symbolic irony to torture the souls based on their sins in the mortal realm. So if we think of a lustful person, they are someone who is pulled in every which direction by their sexual urges and desires. So their punishment is being pulled by the hellish winds in the afterlife, every which way. Sort of ironic, isn't it? This image harkens to the Black Swordsman arc when the souls from the astral realm came to take the Count's body into the afterlife. And if you recall, the eclipse itself is surrounded by a tornado/hurricane that prevents outsiders from entering in. The next image portrays Rizpah, the wife of King Saul, protecting her son's corpses from the birds, elements, and wild animals of the night. In this Berserk panel, we have the persecution of men deemed unholy by Mosgus. Now, while the situation is rather different, the imagery is remarkably similar, with the scavenging birds in the sky and the display of corpses with man-made wooden devices. The next Dore image portrays the death of Elazar. In it, we see elephants in the battlefield, much like the elephants the Kushans used to invade Midland. Here we have lions slaying foreign nations in Samaria. This harkens to the tigers who invaded the Vandamayan estate when Guts and his crew were attempting to bring back Farnese into their group. Now, I really love both of these images right here. On the left, Dore portrays Elijah destroying the messengers of King Ahaziah for consulting the god of Ekron. Now, with Elijah's plea, the heavens cast down fire to consume the king's captain and 50 of his soldiers. Now, this kind of sounds reminiscent of the Sage of Berserk proclaiming the sins of King Geiserik to God so that he would punish his transgressions. And of course, angels were sent down, destroying the kingdom with lightning and earthquakes. Here we have a battle sequence that harkens to many battles in the Berserk canon. Next we see an architectural piece representing the streets and buildings in London, and next to it we have various images of the streets and buildings in Virtanis. This one in particular showcases the Vandamayan estate, which looks similar to the building in the background of the Dore image. This next one showcases a woodland landscape that looks remarkably similar to Elfhelm. I particularly like the tree aesthetics and the varied characters. Now here's an interesting image. It's Dore's reimagining of the classic fairy tale, Sleeping Beauty. Looking at this image immediately reminded me of the tree housing the Corridor of Dreams in Berserk. Now it's rather interesting because Sleeping Beauty is cursed to sleep for hundreds of years, and Casca's ego is trapped in a dreamlike existence, in which she's merely watching Elaine interact with her friends and outsiders. Now here we have an illustration from Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote.
Eddie Cantor, only not totally Jewish looking. Oh, fuck it. Yeah.
An image that showcases corpses hanging from a tree. This image correlates to the moment where Guts' mother and others were hung from a tree, and baby Guts was found in a puddle of mud in afterbirth. Next we have visions of death, which harkens to the image of Skull Knight. Now interestingly enough, in Revelations chapter 6 verse 7, an angel from the east informs the other 4 angels to place a seal on the foreheads of the servants of God. Now it's postulated that Skull Knight was King Geiserik, or in my opinion, a component of King Geiserik, and that Void was a sage appealing to God. In the Tower of Rebirth, we saw various skulls with the brand of sacrifice on their foreheads. It's likely that Void, a future God Hand member and Archangel, was the reason for this seal, because he sacrificed his followers to the God Hand for the sake of his dream. Now back to the vision of death, it's rather interesting that Miura also drew Guts in a similar fashion when he was getting chased by the evil spirits. In addition, we also see Zod drawn in a somewhat similar fashion. And now finally, our last image that I want to cover today, in the Divine Comedy, we have Empyrean, the highest heaven, and the dwelling of God. What's interesting about this image is that it looks like a giant rose, with the souls and angels looking like the petals of said rose. Now we haven't seen Miura's vision of heaven, something he probably had planned for the ending chapters of the manga, but unfortunately, as we all know, he passed away before that happened. But I do find it interesting that Skull Knight's shield has an image of a rose on it. Does this mean that his eternal mission to slay the God Hand is handed down by the heavens itself? Sort of interesting to ponder, given Miura's fondness for Dore's work. Now, of course, there are other famous artists who inspired Miura's Berserk, but I believe Dore was one of the main contributors whom inspired Berserk in extremely profound ways. I mean, you could just see his fingerprints all over the pages. It's undeniable. Now, if this particular video gets enough popularity, I could go through some of the other artists who played a pivotal role in inspiring the famed mangaka. But that's up in your hands for the moment. Until next time, guys, I'll catch you on the flip side.